You don't belong here. Dawson's voice cut through the morning silence. His hand rested on his holster as he stood at Marcus Reed's porch steps, eyes cold. We got a call about someone casing houses. Marcus set down his coffee, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. Officer, I own this house. I moved in 2 days ago. I haven't broken any laws. Dawson's jaw tightened. Sure you do. Get on your knees. Hands behind your head. Now. I'm not getting on my knees on my own property when I've done nothing wrong. Dawson moved fast. His hand shot out, shoving Marcus backward. The newspaper slipped from Marcus's fingers. Within seconds, Dawson had his gun drawn, barrel leveling at Marcus's chest. The safety clicked off. Across the road, curtains pulled back. Phones appeared in windows. A neighbor's voice carried over, "What's he doing that someone called the cops?" Another voice, quieter. "Probably doesn't belong here anyway." Marcus's hands went up slowly, his eyes never leaving Dawson's face. This morning was supposed to be peaceful. Instead, it was about to become the catalyst for something neither of them could imagine. 48 hours earlier, Marcus had pulled into this driveway for the first time. The moving truck was gone. Boxes were stacked in the living room. He'd stood on this same porch, coffee in hand, watching sprinklers wake up across manicured lawns. A woman 2 houses down had waved. A man walking his golden retriever had nodded hello. It felt like the kind of place where people actually meant it when they said, "Welcome to the neighborhood." Now Dawson's gun was 3 feet from his face, and that illusion was shattering in real time. Marcus kept his hands visible, palms open. "Officer, I'm not sure what call you received, but I own this house. I moved in 2 days ago." Dawson's expression didn't change. "We'll see about that. You got ID?" "In my wallet, inside pocket." "Don't move." Dawson circled closer, his finger still near the trigger. Blake shifted his weight from foot to foot, eyes darting between his partner and Marcus. The younger officer's hand wasn't on his weapon, but it wasn't far either. The street had gone quiet. Across the road, a curtain twitched. A phone appeared in a window, camera lens pointing this direction. Dawson pulled the wallet from Marcus's jacket with rough efficiency, flipped it open, and scanned the driver's license. His jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. "Marcus Reed. Says here this is your address." Marcus kept his voice level. "That's because it is." "How'd you afford a place like this?" The question came out sharp, accusatory. "What kind of work do you do, Mr. Reed?" There it was. Not, "Congratulations on the new home." Not, "Sorry for the confusion." Just suspicion wrapped in a badge. Marcus had been here before. Different city, different uniform, same assumption. When he was 12, his father had been pulled over for driving erratically in a neighborhood just like this one. No erratic driving. Just a black man in a nice car. The traffic stop had escalated. His father had complied with every order, and they'd beaten him anyway. No officer was ever disciplined. No report was ever filed. His mother had been told to let it go. Marcus had spent his entire career making sure other people didn't have to let it go. But right now, on his own porch, with a gun pointed at his chest, none of that mattered. He was just another black man who apparently didn't belong. "I work for the federal government," Marcus said carefully. Dawson snorted. "Federal government. Right." He glanced at Blake. "You buying this?" Blake's silence was louder than any answer. The younger officer looked down at his boots, then back up at Marcus. Something moved behind his eyes. Doubt, maybe, or shame. But he didn't speak. Dawson stepped closer. The barrel of his gun was now less than 2 feet away. "Here's what I think happened. I think you're casing houses in this neighborhood. I think you saw an opportunity and decided to test the locks. We've had break-ins around here." Marcus's pulse was steady, but his mind was racing. If he reached for his phone to call this in, Dawson might shoot. If he argued too hard, Dawson might escalate further. And if he stayed silent, he was admitting to a crime he didn't commit. The coffee had gone cold on the porch railing. The newspaper lay crumpled at his feet. The morning he'd imagined, quiet, peaceful, unremarkable, was gone. "Officer Dawson." Marcus kept his tone neutral, non-threatening. "I'm happy to show you the deed to this house. I can call my real estate agent. I can provide you with any documentation you need. But I haven't broken any laws, and I'd appreciate it if you lowered your weapon." Dawson's smile was thin and cold. "I'll decide when I lower my weapon. Now get on your knees." A car door slammed somewhere down the block. More phones were out now. This wasn't just a confrontation anymore. It was becoming a spectacle. And Marcus realized with absolute certainty that this was about to get much worse before it got better. Marcus didn't move. "I'm not getting on my knees. I haven't done anything wrong." The words hung in the air for exactly 2 seconds before Dawson's free hand shot out and shoved Marcus backward. The force wasn't enough to knock him down, but it was enough to make the message clear: comply or things get physical. Blake finally spoke. "Dawson, maybe we should just stay out of this, Thompson." Dawson's voice cracked like a whip. His attention never left Marcus. "I said on your knees. Don't make me say it again." Marcus stood his ground. Every instinct told him to de-escalate, to survive this moment and file a complaint later. But another part of him, the part that had watched his father's funeral, the part that had spent 15 years investigating civil rights violations, refused to kneel on his own property for a crime he didn't commit. "Officer, I'm asking you one more time to lower your weapon and explain what law I've broken." Dawson's face flushed red. "You think you're special? You think because you live in this neighborhood now, you don't have to follow orders?" He took another step forward. The gun was inches from Marcus's face. "On your knees." That's when Dawson's patience ran out. He grabbed Marcus's shoulder and wrenched him sideways. Marcus's hip hit the porch railing. Before he could regain his balance, Dawson had him face down on the concrete steps. One knee pressed into his back, the gun still trained on his head. The concrete was hot against Marcus's cheek. He could taste blood where his lip had split. His arms were wrenched behind him, zip ties cutting into his wrists. Blake stood 3 feet away, frozen, his face pale. "You're making a mistake," Marcus said through gritted teeth. Dawson leaned closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper that only Marcus could hear. "People like you don't belong here. The sooner you figure that out, the better." Across the street, a neighbor shouted, "Hey, what's going on over there?" Another voice joined in. "Someone call 911. Car doors opened, footsteps on pavement. Within seconds, a small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, phones out, recording every moment. A woman Marcus had never met was already on her phone. Voice urgent as she reported what she was witnessing. Dawson's jaw tightened. He hauled Marcus to his feet, still holding his arm in a grip that would leave bruises. "Show's over, folks. Police business. Move along." Nobody moved. The phones kept recording. One man stepped forward, voice steady. "I'm this man's neighbor. His name is Marcus Reed. He just moved in. Why are you arresting him?" Dawson ignored the question. He shoved Marcus toward the patrol car, hand on the back of his head to force him down into the back seat. The door slammed shut with a metallic thunk that echoed down the quiet street. Through the window, Marcus watched Blake finally move. The younger officer approached the crowd, hands raised in a placating gesture. "Everything's under control. We received a call about suspicious activity, and we're just following protocol." "Protocol?" The neighbor's voice rose. "Protocol is throwing an innocent man face first onto concrete?" Blake didn't have an answer for that. He retreated to the patrol car, avoiding eye contact with everyone. As he climbed into the passenger seat, Marcus caught his reflection in the rearview mirror. The officer looked sick. The engine started. As they pulled away from the curb, Marcus twisted in his seat to look back at his house. The front door was still open. His coffee cup was still on the railing, and his newspaper, the one he'd been reading in peace less than 10 minutes ago, was scattered across the porch in torn, crumpled pieces. By the time they reached the station, the video had been uploaded, 3 different angles. 4 million views in the first hour. The caption read, "Black homeowner assaulted by police in his own yard." The city was about to have a very bad day, and Dawson had no idea just how bad it was going to get. They put Marcus in an interrogation room and left him there for 2 hours. No charges, no explanation. Just fluorescent lights humming overhead and the zip ties cutting deeper into his wrists with every passing minute. When the door finally opened, it wasn't Dawson who walked in. It was a man in his 50s with silver hair and captain's bars on his uniform. Morrison. His expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes gave him away. This was damage control, not justice. Morrison sat down across from Marcus and folded his hands on the table. "Mr. Reed, I apologize for the confusion this morning. Officer Dawson responded to a legitimate call about suspicious activity in your neighborhood. He was simply doing his job." Marcus met his gaze without blinking. "Your officer put a gun to my head on my own property. He assaulted me. He arrested me without cause. If that's doing his job, Captain, your department has a serious problem." Morrison's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I understand you're upset. But I'm sure if we all take a step back and look at this rationally..." "Rationally?" Marcus leaned forward as much as the restraints would allow. "I was reading a newspaper. On my porch. In the home I own. There's nothing rational about what happened, and we both know it." For a long moment, Morrison said nothing. Then he reached across the table and cut the zip ties with a pocket knife. "You're free to go, Mr. Reed. No charges will be filed. I trust we can consider this matter closed." Marcus rubbed his wrists where the plastic had bitten into skin. "Consider it closed? Captain, your officer violated my civil rights. That video is already viral. You think cutting me loose makes this disappear?" Morrison stood, his tone cooling by several degrees. "What I think, Mr. Reed, is that you should be grateful this didn't escalate further. Officer Dawson has an exemplary record. 15 years of service, multiple commendations. If you pursue this, it becomes your word against his. I've seen how these things go." There it was, the threat wrapped in politeness. Back down or face the machine. Marcus rose slowly, keeping his expression unreadable. "I'm sure you have seen how these things go, Captain. Thank you for your time." He walked out of the station into afternoon sunlight that felt harsh after the artificial lights. His phone had 17 missed calls, 6 from neighbors, 4 from reporters who'd somehow gotten his number, 3 from his real estate agent, and 4 from a DC area code he recognized immediately. Marcus stepped around the corner of the building, out of sight of the cameras stationed near the entrance, and dialed. A woman's voice answered on the first ring. "Reed, I saw the video. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Director, but we have a situation." "I'd say we have more than a situation. That's the 3rd viral incident involving this department in 2 years. The first 2 got buried. This one won't." Marcus leaned against the brick wall, his mind already moving through scenarios. Morrison tried to sweep it under the rug. Dawson's got 15 years of service and a file full of commendations. Classic playbook. How do you want to handle it? This was the question Marcus had been asking himself for 2 hours in that interrogation room. He could file a formal complaint, hire a lawyer, go through the standard channels. It would take months, maybe years. And in the end, Dawson would probably get a slap on the wrist while Morrison protected him from above. Or he could do what he'd been trained to do, what he'd spent his entire career doing: investigate, dig, find the pattern that everyone else had been too afraid or too complicit to expose. "I want to know how many other Marcus Reeds there are," he said quietly. "How many complaints against Dawson have been filed? How many got buried? And I want to know who's been protecting him." The director was silent for 3 seconds. Officially, you're on vacation for 2 more weeks. Understood. Unofficially, you have full resources. But Reed, be careful. If Morrison's protecting Dawson, it means there's something worth protecting. These things go deeper than one bad cop. Marcus ended the call and stared at his phone. The video of his arrest was still climbing, 7 million views now. Comments ranged from outraged to skeptical to outright racist. But buried in the noise were other voices. People saying, "This happened to me too." People saying, "Dawson did the same thing to my brother." People saying, "I tried to report him and nothing happened." Morrison had made a critical mistake. He'd assumed this would blow over like the others. But Marcus Reed wasn't going to let it go. And 6 hours from now, when a team of federal investigators showed up at the precinct with subpoenas and search warrants, Morrison was going to realize exactly how badly he'd miscalculated. The investigation began at midnight in a hotel room 3 miles from Marcus's house. He'd converted the desk into a command center, laptop, case files, and a whiteboard covered in names and dates. The federal team arrived in unmarked vehicles, 5 agents who specialized in civil rights violations and police misconduct. They worked in shifts, quiet and methodical, pulling records that most departments didn't even know could be pulled. By 3 in the morning, they had their first hit. Dawson's personnel file showed 15 years of spotless service, but the complaint database told a different story. 11 formal complaints filed against him in the past 3 years. Excessive force, racial profiling, unlawful detention, every single one marked unsubstantiated or resolved internally. No disciplinary action, no investigation reports, just complaints that disappeared into the system like they'd never existed. Marcus stared at the screen, his jaw tight. 11 people had tried to speak up. 11 people had been silenced. One of the agents pulled up another file. Morrison signed off on 8 of these dismissals personally. Look at the dates. Dawson received 2 commendations during the same period these complaints were filed. He was being rewarded for the same behavior people were trying to report. Marcus's voice was flat, but anger simmered beneath the surface. By dawn, they had a list of names. 17 people who'd filed complaints against Dawson or had encounters documented in incident reports. Most were Black or Latino. Most had been stopped for minor infractions that never should have escalated. Marcus picked up the phone and started making calls. The first 3 people hung up as soon as he mentioned Dawson's name. The 4th agreed to meet in a public coffee shop. His name was Andre Mitchell. In 2022, Dawson had broken 2 of his ribs during a traffic stop. Andre arrived 15 minutes late, scanning the room before he sat down. His eyes were hard and tired in a way that made him look older than 26. Marcus didn't waste time. "I'm asking you to help me make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." Andre stirred his coffee without drinking it. "You know how many times I've heard that? I filed the report. I went to the station. I told them everything. Morrison himself took my statement. Know what he said?" He looked up, his gaze cutting. "He said Officer Dawson was defending himself. Said I was resisting arrest. Said if I pushed the issue, they'd charge me with assault on an officer." "What did Dawson say to you during the stop?" Andre's jaw worked. "He said people like me didn't belong in their city. He asked why I was driving such a nice car. Like I stole it. Like I couldn't possibly own it." He shook his head. "I work in IT. I make good money. But none of that mattered. All he saw was my skin." Marcus slid a card across the table. "I'm going to need you to tell that story again, on the record, to federal investigators." "Why would I do that?" "So Morrison can bury it again?" "Because Morrison doesn't have jurisdiction over federal investigations, and because this time, we have evidence." Marcus showed him the arrest video. "This time, I'm not going away." Andre watched the video twice. When he looked up, something had shifted in his expression. "You really think you can make this stick?" "I know I can. But I need you to trust me." Andre nodded once, sharp and final. Okay, I'll testify, but I want protection. You'll have it. Federal protection, full documentation, and a lawyer if you need one. Back at the hotel, the team had made progress. They'd installed listening devices in the precinct during routine maintenance, completely legal under federal surveillance statutes. At 4 that afternoon, the devices picked up gold. Morrison's voice came through clear. Dawson, we have a problem. The Reed incident is blowing up. Media's all over it. Dawson's response was defensive. I followed protocol. He was being aggressive. He was sitting on his porch reading a newspaper. Morrison's tone hardened. I've kept you out of trouble for 3 years, but this is different. This is federal attention. If they dig into your record, there's nothing in my record. Because I made sure there's nothing in your record. A pause, then Morrison's voice dropped lower. I need you to write up an incident report. Say Reed was confrontational. Say you had reasonable suspicion. Make it airtight. You want me to lie? I want you to craft a narrative that protects both of us. You think the feds are going to stop with you? They'll look at every complaint, and they'll see my signature on every dismissal. We're in this together. Marcus played it back twice, making sure every word was clear. This wasn't just evidence of a cover-up. It was Morrison actively instructing Dawson to falsify a federal incident. But they needed more. They worked through the night, cross-referencing complaint records with Morrison's emails obtained through federal subpoena. By 3 in the morning, they found it. A folder labeled Cleanup Protocol buried in Morrison's archived files. Inside were draft emails, notes, and instructions for handling complaints against Dawson. Evidence wasn't just being dismissed, it was being actively destroyed. Witness statements edited, timelines manipulated, entire incidents scrubbed from the official record. It was systematic, calculated, and it went all the way to the top. But there was still one piece missing. They had Morrison's corruption documented. They had Dawson's pattern of violence established. What they needed now was someone on the inside willing to testify, someone who'd seen it happen and couldn't live with the silence anymore. Marcus picked up his phone and dialed Blake Thompson's number. The young officer answered on the 3rd ring, his voice cautious. Officer Thompson, this is Marcus Reed. I need to talk to you about what happened on my porch. And I need you to tell me the truth. The line went silent for so long Marcus thought Blake had hung up. Then, barely above a whisper, I can't. If Morrison finds out I'm talking to you, he already knows what's coming. He's going to throw you under the bus along with Dawson unless you decide to be on the right side of this. Marcus kept his voice steady, not threatening, just honest. I know you didn't want what happened that morning. I saw your face. You knew it was wrong. Now's your chance to make it right. Blake's breathing was audible over the phone. If I talk, I lose my job. Maybe worse. If you don't talk, you become part of the system that protects men like Dawson. Is that the cop you wanted to be when you took the oath? Another long silence. Then, quietly, where do you want to meet? Blake chose a diner on the edge of town, the kind of place where cops didn't eat and cameras didn't reach. He arrived in civilian clothes, hood pulled up, eyes darting to every car in the parking lot. When he slid into the booth across from Marcus, his hands were shaking. I shouldn't be here. If Morrison finds out, Morrison's got bigger problems than you right now. Marcus pushed a cup of coffee across the table. But I need to know what you saw, not the official version, the truth. Blake wrapped both hands around the cup like he was trying to warm himself, even though the diner was stifling. Dawson's done this before. Not exactly like what happened to you, but close enough. I've been riding with him for 8 months. I've seen him pull over people for nothing. I've watched him escalate situations that didn't need to escalate. And every time I thought about saying something, Morrison would pull me aside and remind me that loyalty matters more than anything in this department. Loyalty. Marcus's voice was carefully neutral. Is that what they call it? Blake's jaw tightened. 3 weeks ago, a complaint came in against Dawson. Woman said he searched her car without cause, humiliated her in front of her kids. Morrison called a meeting. Told us the complaint was baseless, told us that people make up stories to get settlements, told us to close ranks. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think Dawson was just doing his job and people were lying. But then I saw what he did to you, and I couldn't pretend anymore. Marcus leaned forward. What happened in that meeting? Exactly. Blake pulled out his phone with trembling fingers, swiped through his recordings, and set it on the table. I started recording meetings after the second complaint I saw get buried. I didn't know what I was going to do with them. I just knew something was wrong. He pressed play. Morrison's voice filled the space between them, tinny but clear through the phone speaker. Gentlemen, we've got another situation with Officer Dawson, another complaint. Another accusation of excessive force. And just like the others, it's going to be handled internally and resolved quickly. Dawson is a good cop. He's aggressive, yes, but that's what we need on the streets. The people filing these complaints are looking for payouts. They're looking to undermine law enforcement. We don't let them win. Another voice, younger, uncertain. Captain, what if there's truth to some of these complaints? Morrison's response was ice cold. Then that officer better hope he has partners who understand the meaning of loyalty. Because once internal affairs gets involved, once the media gets involved, everyone goes down. Not just the officer accused, everyone. You want to spend the next year being investigated because you didn't have your partners back? The recording ended. Blake pocketed his phone and stared at the table. That's how it works. You protect each other or you lose everything. I thought that's what being a cop meant. But watching you on that porch, seeing Dawson put his hands on you for nothing, his voice cracked. That's not what I signed up for. Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a USB drive. I need that recording, and I need you to testify that it's authentic and that Morrison said those things in an official capacity. If I do this, my career is over. If you don't, Dawson keeps his badge and does this to someone else. Maybe next time, the person he pulls his gun on doesn't stay calm. Maybe next time, someone dies. Marcus slid the USB across the table. You've got a choice, Officer Thompson. Be the cop who looked the other way, or be the cop who did the right thing when it mattered most. Blake stared at the USB drive for a long moment. His hand hovered over it, then pulled back, then moved forward again. When he finally picked it up, his fingers closed around it tight enough to leave marks. I'll need protection. Morrison's going to come after me. You'll have it. Federal witness protection if necessary. But more than that, you'll have the truth on your side. Marcus stood. Copy that recording to the drive. Include everything you have. And tomorrow morning, meet me at the Federal Building downtown. We're going to end this. Blake nodded slowly, still gripping the USB like it was a lifeline. As Marcus walked out of the diner, he pulled out his phone and sent a single text to his team. We have the smoking gun. Move to Phase 2. By tomorrow, Morrison and Dawson would be in handcuffs, and the system that had protected them for years would finally face consequences. The federal team hit the precinct at 8 in the morning, 4 black SUVs rolling up to the front entrance in perfect formation. Marcus stepped out of the lead vehicle, badge clipped to his belt, federal warrant in hand. The morning shift was just coming on duty. Officers milled around the lobby, coffee in hand, completely unprepared for what was about to happen. Morrison emerged from his office, his face already tight with anger. What the hell is this? Marcus held up the warrant. Captain Morrison, I'm Special Agent Marcus Reed with the FBI. We have a federal warrant to search these premises and seize all records related to complaints filed against Officer James Dawson. We also have warrants for your arrest and Officer Dawson's on charges of civil rights violations, conspiracy to obstruct justice, and falsification of federal records. The lobby went dead silent. Every officer froze mid-motion, eyes wide, mouths open. Morrison's face cycled through shock, rage, and calculation in 3 seconds. This is absurd. You can't just walk in here and, I can, and I am. Marcus's voice carried across the room, clear and unwavering. Officer Dawson, step forward. Dawson stood near the duty desk, still holding his morning coffee. The color had drained from his face. I don't know what you think you're doing, but I'm not. You pulled a gun on me 4 days ago on my front porch. You assaulted me without cause. You violated my civil rights and filed a false report to cover it up. Marcus pulled a folder from his jacket and held it up. We have 11 documented complaints against you spanning 3 years. Excessive force, racial profiling, unlawful detention, every single one buried by Captain Morrison. Morrison stepped forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. Reed, you're making a serious mistake. Whatever vendetta you think, this isn't a vendetta. This is justice. Marcus opened the folder and began reading. Andre Mitchell, pulled over in 2022 for a broken taillight. You broke 2 of his ribs and told him people like him didn't belong in your city. Should I keep going? Because I have 8 more names just like his. The other officers were backing away now, creating distance between themselves and Dawson. Some looked horrified, others looked angry. But nobody came to his defense. Dawson's hands clenched into fists. Those complaints were investigated and found baseless. I was cleared every time. You were protected every time. Marcus turned to Morrison. By a captain who systematically destroyed evidence, edited witness statements, and threatened anyone who spoke up. We have the emails, Captain. We have the recordings. We have everything. Morrison's face went pale. What recordings? The door to the precinct opened and Blake Thompson walked in, still in uniform, his face set with grim determination. He crossed the lobby and stood next to Marcus, pulling a USB drive from his pocket. These recordings, Captain, the ones where you told us to close ranks, the ones where you said loyalty matters more than truth, the ones where you instructed Dawson to falsify his report about Agent Reed. Dawson spun on Blake, betrayal and rage twisting his features. You little... Enough. Marcus's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Officer Dawson, Captain Morrison, you're both under arrest. You have the right to remain silent. 2 federal agents moved forward with handcuffs. Dawson backed up against the desk, his hand instinctively moving toward his weapon. 3 agents drew their guns in perfect synchronization. Don't make this worse than it already is. For a moment, Dawson looked like he might fight. Then his shoulders sagged and he held out his wrists. The cuffs clicked into place with a sound that echoed through the silent lobby. Morrison didn't resist. He stood rigid as the agents cuffed him, his jaw working but no words coming out. As they led him toward the door, he turned back to look at Blake. The hatred in his eyes was pure and cold. Blake met his gaze without flinching. I'd rather be finished than be like you. The agents led both men outside where news cameras had already gathered. Reporters surged forward, shouting questions. Flashbulbs exploded. The video of Marcus's arrest had gone viral 4 days ago. Now the footage of Dawson and Morrison being perp-walked out of their own precinct would replace it. Marcus stood in the lobby and watched through the glass doors as they loaded both men into separate vehicles. Around him, the remaining officers stood in stunned silence. Some looked relieved. Others looked terrified. Blake moved to stand beside him, his voice barely above a whisper. What happens now? Marcus turned to face the room. Now we figure out how deep this goes, and we make sure it never happens again. Blake looked down at his badge, still clipped to his belt, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The same badge that Dawson had hidden behind for 15 years. Marcus's voice was firm but not unkind. That badge means something, but only if the people wearing it remember what they swore to protect. The investigation didn't stop with 2 arrests. It expanded like cracks spreading through ice, revealing fractures that had been hidden for years. Over the next 3 weeks, federal agents interviewed dozens of officers, reviewed thousands of pages of documents, and uncovered a pattern that went far beyond Dawson and Morrison. 7 additional cases emerged. 7 people who'd filed complaints and been silenced. 7 incidents that had been scrubbed from the record so thoroughly that even the victims had started to doubt their own memories. Marcus sat across from each of them in turn, listening to their stories, documenting their pain. And with each testimony, the case against Morrison grew stronger. The trial took place 6 weeks after the arrests. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, activists, police officers, both supportive and hostile, and every single person who'd filed a complaint against Dawson over the years. Andre Mitchell sat in the front row, his hands folded in his lap, his back straight. When his turn came to testify, he walked to the stand with his head held high and told his story without hesitation. The prosecutor played the recording Blake had provided. Morrison's voice filled the courtroom, cold and calculating as he instructed his officers to close ranks and bury complaints. Several jurors visibly recoiled. Dawson's lawyer tried to argue his client had been following orders, that the department culture had created an impossible situation. But the video of Marcus's arrest, played 3 times during the trial, made that defense crumble. You couldn't follow orders that hadn't been given yet. You couldn't blame the system for a gun you chose to pull. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous. Dawson was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for civil rights violations, assault under color of authority, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. Morrison received 5 years and forfeited his pension. The judge's voice was steady but cutting as she delivered the sentence. You were entrusted with protecting the citizens of this city. Instead, you used your authority as a weapon against the very people you swore to serve. You have betrayed your oath and undermined public trust in law enforcement itself. That trust must be rebuilt, and it begins with accountability. As the bailiffs led both men out of the courtroom, Morrison's eyes swept across the gallery one last time. They landed on Blake, who sat beside Marcus in the front row. Morrison's expression was unreadable, but Blake didn't look away. The reforms came swiftly. The mayor, facing pressure from both the federal government and a furious public, ordered a complete overhaul of the police department. Body cameras became mandatory for every officer on duty, with footage automatically uploaded to an independent server that couldn't be edited or deleted. A civilian oversight board was established with subpoena power and the authority to investigate complaints without departmental interference. Every officer in the precinct was required to undergo retraining on de-escalation, implicit bias, and constitutional rights. Blake Thompson was promoted to lieutenant and put in charge of the reform initiative. At 31 years old, he became one of the youngest officers ever to hold that rank. Some of his former colleagues congratulated him. Others refused to speak to him, seeing his testimony as betrayal rather than courage. He stood in front of the assembled department on his first day in the new role, looking out at faces that ranged from supportive to openly hostile. His voice was steady when he spoke. I know some of you think what I did was wrong. I know some of you believe loyalty to your fellow officers should come before everything else, but I took an oath to protect and serve the public, not to protect officers who abuse their power. If you can't live with that, if you can't commit to doing this job the right way, then you're in the wrong profession. This department failed the people it was supposed to protect. We're going to fix that, starting today. 3 officers walked out during his speech. 12 more resigned over the following week. But the ones who stayed, the ones who'd been waiting for someone to finally say what Blake had said, they became the foundation of something better. Marcus attended Blake's promotion ceremony, standing at the back of the room as the new lieutenant received his badge. It wasn't the same badge Blake had worn before. This one was newly minted, engraved with words that hadn't been there before. Serve with honor. The 4th time the badge appeared in this story, but now its meaning had been reborn. After the ceremony, Blake found Marcus outside the precinct. I wanted to thank you for giving me the chance to do the right thing. Marcus shook his head. I didn't give you anything. You made a choice. You lived with the consequences. That's courage, not charity. Blake looked down at his new badge, running his thumb over the engraving. You think it'll actually change anything? All these reforms, all these promises? People have heard it before. It'll change if people like you make sure it does. Marcus held out his hand. The system only works if the people inside it refuse to let it fail. Blake took the handshake, firm and sure. The same sun that had been shining when Dawson pulled a gun on an innocent man now illuminated a precinct that was finally ready to live up to its oath. Blake Thompson knocked on Andre Mitchell's door 3 days after his promotion. He'd rehearsed what he was going to say a dozen times on the drive over, but when Andre opened the door and recognized the uniform, all those carefully planned words evaporated. "I know you have no reason to trust me," Blake said quietly, "but I wanted to come here in person, to apologize. Not for Dawson. He'll never apologize, and even if he did, it wouldn't mean anything. I'm apologizing for myself. For standing there and doing nothing while he hurt you." Andre stood in the doorway for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he stepped back and gestured Blake inside. They sat at Andre's kitchen table, the same table where Andre had once filled out a complaint form that Morrison buried. The same table where he'd convinced himself that fighting the system was pointless. "I thought about that day every single day for 2 years," Andre said finally. "I blamed myself for a long time, wondered if I deserved what happened because I didn't comply fast enough or speak respectfully enough." Blake's throat tightened. "You didn't deserve any of it. Nothing you did justified what Dawson did to you. And I should have stopped him. I should have reported him. Instead, I stayed silent because I was afraid." He met Andre's eyes. "I can't change what happened, but I promise you that I'll spend every day of my career making sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." Andre was quiet for a moment. Then, to Blake's surprise, he extended his hand across the table. "That's all I ever wanted. Not revenge, not money, just someone in that department to acknowledge that what happened was wrong, that I mattered." Blake took his hand, and the weight that had been sitting on his chest since that morning on Marcus's porch finally began to lift. Over the next week, Blake visited 3 more people who'd filed complaints against Dawson. Some listened, but refused to forgive. But others, like Andre, saw something in Blake's willingness to show up that gave them a measure of peace. Meanwhile, Marcus returned to his house, the one with the porch where this had all started. The neighbors who'd recorded the video came over with homemade cookies and awkward apologies. The man with the golden retriever stopped by to introduce himself properly. The woman 2 houses down invited Marcus to a block party the following weekend. It wasn't perfect. Some neighbors still watched him a little too carefully when he checked his mail. But it was better. And better was a start. One evening, Blake stopped by Marcus's house with 2 cups of coffee. They sat on the porch, the same porch where Dawson had pulled his gun, and watched the sun set over the neighborhood. "I keep thinking about all the other cops out there who see something wrong and don't speak up," Blake said quietly. "The ones who tell themselves it's not their problem or it's too risky." Marcus took a sip of his coffee. "You can't save them all. You can only show them what happens when one person decides to do the right thing. Maybe that'll be enough." Blake nodded slowly. "Morrison told me once that loyalty was the most important thing in law enforcement, that protecting your fellow officers was sacred." "And what do you think now?" Blake looked down at his badge, the one engraved with "Serve with Honor." "I think loyalty to the truth matters more than loyalty to people who abuse their power. I think protecting the public is what's actually sacred." Marcus raised his coffee cup in a quiet toast. "To doing the right thing, even when it costs you everything." Blake clinked his cup against Marcus's. "Especially when it costs you everything." The street was quiet except for the sound of children playing in a yard down the block. The golden retriever trotted past with his owner, who waved. A teenager rode by on a bicycle, earbuds in, completely unaware of the history that had unfolded on this porch. Marcus picked up his newspaper from the small table beside him, the same paper he'd been reading that morning, now replaced with today's edition. He unfolded it slowly, took another sip of coffee, and began to read. No guns, no threats, no confrontation. Just a man reading his newspaper on his own porch, the way it should have been from the beginning. 6 months later, the reforms were holding. Body camera compliance was at 98%. The Civilian Oversight Board had reviewed 43 cases. 3 officers had been fired, 2 had been retrained. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Marcus returned to his regular duties at the FBI, but he kept in touch with Blake. They met for coffee once a month, comparing notes on the slow work of rebuilding trust. Andre Mitchell started a support group for people who'd experienced police misconduct. 12 people showed up to the first meeting. By the 6th meeting, there were 40. The precinct displayed a new mission statement in the lobby. We serve with honor, transparency, and accountability to all. Marcus stood on his porch one Sunday morning, newspaper in hand, coffee cooling on the railing. The street was alive with weekend sounds, lawnmowers, children laughing, dogs barking. Normal, peaceful. Exactly what he'd wanted when he bought this house. He unfolded the newspaper and settled into his chair. The front page carried a story about the department's reforms. Another article discussed the Oversight Board's first 6 months. Progress. Visible, measurable progress. But Marcus knew the numbers that didn't make the front page. Over 1,000 complaints filed against police officers every year across the country. Only 2% result in actual discipline. Thousands of people still waiting for someone to believe them. He took a sip of his coffee and turned the page. The morning sun felt warm on his face. Children rode bicycles past his house. The golden retriever from down the street trotted by with his owner, both of them waving. This was what peace looked like. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of justice. Marcus picked up his phone and typed a message to those who'd followed his story. Your story matters. Your voice matters. If you've experienced injustice, document it, report it, and find others who'll stand with you. Change starts when we refuse to stay silent. He hit send and set the phone aside. Then he opened his newspaper, took another sip of coffee, and began to read. Just a man on his porch, reading the paper, living his life, the way it should have been from the very beginning.